Okay, we'll get started. We're trying to make some progress on answering Rabbi Kivega's kasha. Let's go over the kasha. Rabbi Kivega wants to know, once the Torah has revealed to us in the word litzror, and that's even without the extra resh, that soras sota is ptura min hayibum, which means that the soras erva, I meant to say, that an erva sets up a patur of yibum even on Hatzara. So we had the case of Shimon, who's married to both Leah and, yesterday we called her Shprinza, just a bit of change, today we'll call her Rivka. So Shimon is married. I just thought Shprinza was a little original, I never met anyone with the name Shprinza, but I've heard the name. In any event, what? My grandmother was Shprinza. Okay, see? In any event, so we have Shimon who's married to, we called it now Leah and Rivka. Leah is a sister to Reuben's wife, Rachel. Shimon dies. Shimon is married to both, as we said before, Leah and Rivka. Leah, when she falls v'yibum to Reuben, is achos ichto, the sister of his wife. Therefore, she's an erva. And now the Torah says, and this we derive from the pasuk Litzror, that even Rivka is exempt from Yibum. And by the way, when we say exempt from Yibum, it means that there's no heter of Yibum, because when there's no mitzvah of Yibum, then ipso facto, she's an erev of achos of Eshes Achiv. And therefore, not only is Leah out of the ballpark, but even Rivka is out of the ballpark. Fine. Rabbi Kivega has no problem with that. Now the Gemara goes a step further on Daf Gimel and derives from the extra resh, because it said lotzur and it says litzror. So the extra resh teaches us soras erv. And here's where Rabbi Kivega is baffled. He says, why do I need a pasuk for soras sorav erv? Which means that in a case where Shimon leaves these two wives after he dies, and now Levi comes along and he marries Rivka. Rivka, right? Rivka is now, right now. So wait a minute. So we have to add another point. Levi marries Rivka and marries another one. All right, we'll call it Shprinz. Okay, it's an honor of Rich. Okay, so now Levi leaves Rivka. Rivka is in Saras Erva. And Rivka's Sarah, who's at Saras Erva, we call the Shprinza, doesn't fall for Yibum, and the Gemara derives that from a special resh, an extra redundant letter in the Torah. Wait a second. Once the Torah told in Lotzur, right, even before the extra resh, that Saras Erva doesn't fall for Yibum, that makes Leah into an Erva, because Leah, I'm sorry. What I meant to say, that makes Rivka into an erva. Why? Because Leah is an erva, because she's an erva. She is the sister of Rachel. But Rivka is not an erva. She's a tsaras erva. But once the Torah said that the tsaras erva doesn't fall for Yibum, then ipso facto, she becomes an erva herself of Eshes Achiv. Why? Because when there's no mitzvah of Yibum, like in the case of tsaras erva, then there's no heter that removes the Easter erva of Eshes Achiv. So since the Tsaras erva is now in and of herself an erva of Eshes Achiv, then therefore when Rivka falls for Yibum together with Shprinza is a Tsaras erva. I don't need that extra category of Tsaras erva, because the Tsaras erva is an erva, is Memela, the hard Tzara is a Tsaras erva, because she herself, the Tsaras erva, is now an erva. And again, what's the logic that Rabbi Kivega assumes that she herself is an erva? Because if there's no Yibum in the case of Tsaras erva, that we've already derived from the pasuk, then she becomes an erva of Eshes Achiv. And if you take a look at the paragraph of Rabbi Kivega, he says in the name of Tosfos, which in the footnote you'll see says it's on Daf Lamed Beis. Tosfos says that Yevama, any Yevama where the Torah says that when she falls for Yibum there is no Yibum, Tosfos says Nesra be'Iser Eishes Ach. That's it. And we could give a few examples. Like the classic example of this would be, let's say a woman falls for Yibum and her late husband left a child. Later on, this child unfortunately died. In such a case, there's no Yibum. Why? Why not say, well, there was no Yibum because he left Zerah, but now that Zerah's gone? The answer is that once B'shas Nefila, that's the critical moment, when, let's say, Shimon died, there was no Yibum to his wife because Shimon had left a child, then his wife becomes to the Achim an erva of Eishes Ach. And why is that? Because the only removal of the Eishes Ach would have been the mitzvah milah of Yibum, and there is no mitzvah Yibum in this case because he left the Zerah. And let's give another example. An example that's very close to our case over here, and that's Achos Ishto. Let's say after Shimon dies, Reuven's wife Rachel dies, and now there's no erva of Achos Ishto between Reuven and Leah, because Leah is not Achos Ishto, she's gone. Or for that matter, let's say Reuven would have divorced his wife Rachel. In all those cases, there's no Yibum to Leah, because since at the Shas Nefila, when the Yibum emerged, the Zika emerged, there was no possibility of realizing, of implementing that Yibum, because she was at that moment Achos Ishto. Therefore, she becomes Eishes Achim. And Eishes Achim, Shalom, B'makom Mitzvah, is an erva of Eishes Achim. Hence, Rabbi Akiva derives just mathematically that Tsaras erva is really a Tsaras erva. Because once the Torah took the Tsaras erva out of the picture, meaning Rivka is no longer included in Yibum, Rivka now becomes Eishes Achim. So when Rivka, together with Spritzel, marries Levi, well, Spritzel is basically an Eishes erva. She's a Tsaras erva. Comes along the Nitziv. And he wants to be the first on this long list of who's who and answer the kasha of Kiveh. Now, the Nitziv, based on a Tosfos, which is on Daf, I'm not sure which Daf it is, I'll tell you in a minute. Oh yeah, it's here on Daf Beis, right? We didn't learn the Tosfos Ad Sof, that's the second Tosfos in the Masechet, but Tosfos quotes Yerushalmi. And again, we don't know all the details of the Yerushalmi. We just know the principle in abstract terms. And that is that an Eishes Ish does not generate a ptur vis-a-vis Hatzara of Yibum. Even though Eishes Ish is I would say it's the first on the list of Arayas, but nevertheless it's not listed here amongst the 15. And Tosfos says the reason for that, Yerushalmi, is because the ptur of Tzara, meaning Tzaras Erva, is derived from Achos Ishto. Now, the difference here, now, why is Achos Ishto in this context a paradigm? What feature, what characteristic of Achos Ishto as an erva sets it up as a category to the exclusion of Eishes Ish? And the answer is that there's nothing that could happen between a man and his wife's sister, nothing active that could happen. That's the main point. To remove that erva. Masha Ein Ken, Eishes Ish, you can remove the erva through a Maisa Gerish. And therefore, Eishes Ish is not similar to Achos Ishto. Achos Ishto is, from the perspective of human involvement, is absolutely sealed. It is absolute. It is unconditional. There is no action, again, permissible action, as I said yesterday. You could take the law into your hands, but there's no physical action that you can take to remove the error. That characteristic sets up our category of 15 arayos, all derived from that one erva of Achos Ishto that generate a Ptur and Netzar. But Eishes Ish is radically different because you can actively remove that erva by giving a get to your wife. That's what we have in Tosis in the name of the Yerushalmi. Okay. Now the Netziv is going to apply this logic to the case of Eishes Ach. And yesterday, I couldn't wrap my head around this. What do you mean Eishes Ach? There's nothing that he could do to actively change the erev of Eishes Ach. And we saw in the Rambam explicitly at the beginning of Hilchos Isurei Bia that Eishes Ach applies even after Gerush. So the fact that, let's say, if my brother would divorce his wife, that doesn't mean that I'm allowed to marry his wife after he divorces her. She remains in the category of an erev of Eishes Ach. So what is the Netziv's point over here when he says that there's a possibility of Gerushin, and therefore Eishes Ach belongs to the category of Eishes Ish that doesn't pucker up the Tzara because it's not similar to Achos Ishto, because Achos Ishto doesn't lend itself to a Masechet Gerushin to remove the erva. And the only time he'd be allowed to marry Achos Ishto is after his wife dies. But Gerushin wouldn't change it. Gerushin doesn't change Eishes Ach. No. Okay. I took a second look at this Netziv. I'm going to read to you the last 3.5 lines in paragraph Aleph, which Aleph represents the first on this list of the Metartzim who come to answer Rav Kivei. He says, "Umitam zeh, af tzoras erva, eino poteres es tzorasa mishum ervas Eishes Ach." Why is that? Sharei af isura Holui biyad haba. V'yochol hu latira me iser Eishes Ach lichsheyomus al yidei sheyigaresh es ha'erva b'chayot v'shuv lo tieh tzorasa erva. Now again, I read these words a million times and it didn't make any sense to me, but now I think it makes sense to me. What the Netziv is pointing out that's unique about the Iser Erev of Eishes Ach is the following. You have Ruvain and Shimon, two brothers. Shimon marries Leah. Leah is an erva to Ruvain under the halacha of ervas Eishes Ach. Is that correct? Now watch what happens. Ruvain, I'm sorry. This is my mistake that I said Ruvain. I think the pshat in the Netziv. Just 1 second, let me get it again. Yeah, is Shimon. Let's see if it works out. Shimon divorces his wife and then dies without children. Leah, the wife of Ruvain's brother, Shimon, will now fall for Yibum to Ruvain, and he will be Mi'avin, or give a chalitza, right? Why? Because since Shimon delivered a get to his wife, then at the moment of the Nefilah for Yibum, his wife Leah is no longer Ashes Ach. Now, you'll ask me, well, if he gave a divorce, a bill of divorce to his wife Leah, so the whole parasha of Yibum doesn't follow. Yeah, but it will follow in if Shimon has another wife, right? Because she would be Tsaras Erva, and she's no longer Tsaras Erva. Why isn't she Tsaras Erva? What happened to the Erev Eshesach? The Erev Eshesach disappeared as a result of the fact that Shimon divorced his wife, Leah. So now Rivka will fall for Yibum to Reuven, and she's not a Tsaras Erva. And why isn't she a Tsaras Erva? Because even if Shimon did not divorce his wife, he could have divorced his wife. And that means that Ashes Ach is a unique erva. Now you'll ask me, why is it that Ashes Ach is, lends itself to this gerushin to be matir? The answer is because of the mitzvah of Yibum. It's the only erva that we can undermine and permit in a case of Yibum. There's only one erva, and that's Ashes Ach. So Ashes Ach now becomes very unique. Why? Because the Yavam himself could have delivered a get to his wife, and therefore she's no longer Ashes Achiv if he dies afterwards. So that erva of Ashes Ach will not generate a ptur. Again, I have to emphasize over and over again. We're not talking about a case where Shimon delivered a get to his wife Leah, right? Because otherwise the whole discussion about Ervas, about Tsaras Erva wouldn't come to play. He did not deliver a get to his wife, Leah. So therefore, Leah and Rivka fall to Yibum to Reuven. But in this case, the Erev of Ashes Ach could not generate a ptur on Rivka because had Shimon delivered her to get to his wife, that would have removed the Iser Erva of Ashes Ach at the moment that he would die. Again, Lamaisa, I think that it's his point is to analyze Ashes Ach and see as an erva whether we can categorize it under Achos Ishto, which is typical of an erva that can never be removed, or under Ashes Ish, which represents an erva that can be removed through a Masechet Yevamot. Says the Netziv, there is a possibility of removing an erva through the Masechet Yevamot. Again, it's a little tricky because Lamaisa, he didn't deliver a get to his wife. And therefore Yibum is matir the erva. But since in a case, let me have it. If he did not deliver a get to his wife, the Torah would what? Would be matir the Iser of Ashes Ach. And why is that? Because of the mitzvah of Yibum. Therefore, in a case where he did not deliver, right? In a case where he did not deliver a get, and now you have a tzara of an Ashes Ach, right? A tzara of an Ashes Ach is not a tzaras erva. Why? Because the Torah was matir Ashes Ach. Okay, fine. Now what happens if, let's say, Shimon is married to Leah, who is Ashes, who is Achos Ishto, and he has another wife named Rivka. When Shimon dies, Rivka becomes a tzaras erva, correct? But Rivka could not pater up Spritzel in the next round when Levi marries Rivka. One second. I mean, Levi has a different wife, right? We'll find another name for her. And why is that? Because what Iser Erva would apply to Rivka? Rivka is in no way related to Reuven. She's only related to Reuven in the sense that the Torah said that Tzaras Erva is not is not included in Yibum, correct? Now you want to say that we are Choser V'niyar as far as the Yisur Erev Veshus Ach, and therefore Rivka would patter up Reuven from Yibum vis-a-vis Levi's other wife. The answer is that that Rivka is a Tsaras Erva, but to what Erva can we apply her status as a Tsaras Erva? Only to the Erva Veshus Ach. Otherwise, Rivka is not related to Reuben, correct? So the only possible Erva, which is what Kivega was stretching his arm out to, was Eshes Ach. Says the Netziv, Eshes Ach is a different kind of an Erva. Let me read it one more time. Sharei Af Isura Polui Biyad Habal Yochel Hulatira the Iser Ashes Ach Lichsheyamus. We're talking about Rivka, right? Rivka is now a Tsaras Ervat because of Shimon being married to both Rivka and Leah. Now, what are we saying about Rivka? Since she's a Tsaras Ervat, the Torah says that she doesn't fall for you, but let her be an Ashes Ach. Memela, so pater up Levi's other wife, Midin Tsaras Ashes Ach. Says the Netziv, Yachol hu lahatira me'iser Ashes Ach lichsheyamus, means the following, that if Shimon would deliver a get to Rivka, then she would no longer be a Shazach. Beautiful. I think it works out. Now, both say, am I crazy or not? Do you hear what he's saying? Let me try this, because I think I have it. What's the status of Rivka? Rivka is a Tsaras Erev, correct? Because she shared Leah with Shimon, and Leah was an Erva of Achos Ishto vis-a-vis Reuven, correct? Fine. Shimon dies, and Levi is Miyabem Shimon, Shimon's wife Rivka, I meant to say. Okay, now Levi is married to Rivka and another woman. Comes along Rabbi Kiva and says, well, guess what? Rivka is Ashes Achiv. Why? Because as a Tsaras Erva, she doesn't fall for Yibum, ipso facto, she's Ashes Achiv. Correct? Oh. What happens now if let me get this right. Yeah, I think it's Shimon. Let me make sure. We'll check it out. If Shimon had delivered a get to Rivka before he died, then Rivka is not a Tsaras Erva. Why? Because the status of a woman as a Tsaras Erva emerges with the mitzvah of Yibum and Zikas Yibum at the time of Nefila Yibum, which means at the time of the death of Shimon. If Shimon delivered a get to his wife Rivka, she's no longer Neshes Ach. What do I mean? She's no longer Tsaras Erva. In other words, Rivka in and of herself. Let me get this straight. One second. I had it, now I don't have it again. Keeps coming in and out, sorry. I'm not giving up on this, it's it. I had it, for a second I saw it mamish in front of me, now I'm losing. 1 second. Now it's back to Rivka and to Leah, correct? Now, what So if now let's say she now falls for you. So Kivega says that she has a status of an erva of Ashes. Correct? Tsaras erva is a tsaras erva. Why? Because any other woman who shares the marriage relationship with Rivka, right, is now a tsaras erva because the erva of Ashes of Ashes off. Correct? Says when it's he can what? He can if he would deliver a what are you going to tell me? That she is Ashes of. Yeah, the answer is that it's not the Torah's Ashes. The reason why there's no Yibum is because she is a Tsaras Erev. Now, if Shimon would deliver a get to Rivka, she's no longer Tsaras Erev. She would remain in Ashes but she's not. In other words, when Shimon dies and he leaves Rivka, correct? So what's preventing Yibum between Ruvain and Rivka? You can't tell me it's because of Ashes Ach. The Torah says that there's a mitzvah Yibum in the case of Ashes Ach. You're going to have to tell me because it is an erev of what? I'm sorry, because of the category called Tsaras Erev. But it's not a category of Ashes Ach. So what does the Netziv mean by saying that Ashes Ach is more similar to Ashes Ish than it is to Achos Ishto, and it lends itself to Gerushin? He's pointing out that if it would be Gerushin, then what would happen over here? Then, as far as the category of Tsaras Erev, it's no longer a Tsaras Erev. He says, Af Tsaras Ereva, Eni Poteres Es Tsarasa, Mishum Erevas Eishes. Sharei Af Isura, Tolui Biyad HaBaal, V'yochel Hu La'atira, Ne'iser Eishes Ach, Lichsheyamus, and I think he means if not for the status of Saras Erva, Al Yidei Shigarish Es Erva B'chayav, Shuv Lo Tia Tsaras Erva. In other words, what's the nature of the let's say Shimon would have divorced Rivka in his lifetime. Therefore, his sorrow does it mean his sorrow? Maybe he doesn't give names. That's the whole trouble here. Would have been worked out nicely if he gave names. No, maybe he means Levi. Just to see, Levi marries Rivka. He's at Sarah. Levi marries Rivka, After Shimon died, he was a Tsaras Erev. But now Rivka has another Tzara, and she becomes Tsaras Erev.
Now he divorces Rivka.
Who? Levi?
Dies. There's
and then it's saying she would, if not for the pasuk. The reason for that is because she's no longer a tsaras erva, because Levi gave a divorce to Rivka. If Levi gives a divorce to Rivka, so then Levi's other wife is not a tsara to Rivka. But again, the Nitzim is pointing out something about the Erev of Eishes Ah. Is he not? He had established based on Tosfos that Eishes Ish is a new category because it's called Isura Tolui Bibal, correct? That he can deliver again. It says, now the Erva of Tsoras Erva, right, which is now the Erva that generates the din of Tsoras Erva, the pure of Tsoras Erva. Now that Erva of Tsoras Erva also lends itself to a get. It's Tolui. What was the language again? It's Isura Tolui Bibal. Because Yochol Hula Hatira, the Isur Eishes Ach Lichshe Yomus, Matirha, by what? Al Yidei Garish Esa Erva B'chayim. So Steve, you're suggesting he's referring to Levi. The Levi could divorce Rivka. Therefore, Levi's other wife is not a tzara of a tzaras erva. Rivka was a tzaras erva, but now Rivka was divorced. And therefore, Levi's other wife is not a tzara to a tzaras erva. What does that have to do? So it's Isura Toli Biada Baal, meaning that since Levi has the possibility of delivering a divorce to Rivka, let's go back to Rivka in the first one. Shimon could have divorced Rivka. With regard to Shimon divorcing Rivka, then Rivka is out of the ballpark. So then, there's no issue of a tzara to Rivka if Rivka received a divorce from Shimon. I don't think that's what the Nitziv would have in mind. Why? Because then clearly Levi's other wife has no connection with Rivka if Rivka was divorced by Shimon B'chayim. Let's say that Shimon did not divorce his wife. So then, when Levi marries Rivka and another wife, she becomes a tzaras tzara. Says the Nitziv, but since Shimon could have delivered a get to his wife Rivka, that would have removed from Spritzel, right, from Levi's other wife, the status of a tzaras tzara. So what is the Nitziv saying? Is the Nitziv saying that Gerushin here would operate to remove the status of tzaras tzara, or is the Nitziv saying that Gerushin would operate to remove the erev of Eishes Ach? Understand what I'm saying? The language here is very ambiguous. It starts by saying that just like in Ashes Ish, we have a category called what? Called Isur Toli B'Baal, was the possibility of Gerushin. And then he goes on to say, Mishum Ervas Ashes Ach Sha'af Isura Toli B'Yad Baal, which means that he could be mated the Isur Ashes Ach through a get. So it sounds like he's saying something about the essence or the nature of the Erev of Ashes Ach. Am I right? But then at the end, he says something totally different. He says that Al Yidesha Yigarech Es HaErev B'Chayev. He's not being matir the Isur Ashes Ach because Gerushin doesn't have the power to be matir the Isur Ashes Ach. But Shuv Lo Tia Tzarasa Tzoras Erev. Now he's saying a whole different concept that there's no Tzoras Erev because the Tzoras Erev received a divorce. But I think what he means is that the Tzoras Erva, in order to set up a tour for Hot Tzara, right? That's Tzoras Erva. So the Tzoras Erva has to be an Erva of Ashes Ach. Because again, she has no other relationship to the Yavam, to Ruvain. You're left with Ashes Ach, correct? But as far as her ability to set up a tour of Tzoras Erev, which means for Rivka to potentially infect another woman as her tzara, and Rivka is a Tzoras Erev. And now you're going to tell me, Rabbi Kiva, that is going to be effectuated by virtue of the fact that Rivka is Ashes Achim, because there was no Yibum, she was a Tzoras Erev, comes along the Nitziv, and he's saying, well, if you want to set up that Erev of Ashes Ach in the case of Tzoras Erev, and therefore she could generate and pass on the status of a Tzoras Erev to Hot Tzara. Well, I have news for you. That Isur of Ashes Ach that now applies to Rivka, she was married to Shimon Reuben's brother, lends itself to removal. What do I mean by lend itself to removal? Not that he would remove the Isur Ashes Ach. Even after Shimon would deliver a divorce to Rivka still remains Asura to Reuben. But what it would do is it would remove the status of Ashes Ach as a Tzoras Erva, meaning we're saying that B'Torah's Tzoras Erva, she has the status of an Ashes Ach. Well, I have news for you. Shimon could deliver a divorce to his wife, and if he did so, that would be matir the erva of Tzoras Erva. Again, she remains an Ashes Ach, but she's no longer in the category of a Tzoras Erva to infect in the next round her co-wife, if I can use that term. That's a very ambiguous term, but you know what I mean, right? So let me just go over it one more time, and then we have to go on because, I can't spend all the precious time that I had with you on this mitzvah, but it does, it does confuse me and challenge me all the time. Now Rivka is a Tzoras Erva. Now Rabbi Kiva says that how does a Tzoras Erva set up a tour on Tzoras Tzara? It's got to be via the mechanism of the Erva of Ashes Ach. Well, in this particular scenario, the Erva of Ashes Ach lends itself to be removed. Why? I mean, you can't remove the Erva of Ashes Ach, but what you could remove is the manifestation, if I can use that word, of the Erev of Ashes Ach as a Tzoras Erva, right? So you want to equate Tzoras Erva with Ashes Ach. That once the Torah says that Tzoras Erva doesn't fall for Yibum, she becomes an Ashes Ach, and now she could patter up Hatzara as the Tzoras Erva from Yibum. The answer is you can't introduce here the Erev of Ashes Ach because as far as her ability to maintain a status of Tzoras Erva, which now generates Eishes Ach, that status of Tzoras Erva lends itself to a Heter Gerushin. Why? Because if Tzoras Erva is an Erva, well, that could be removed. Again, what do you mean removed? You can't remove the Eishes Achiv, but you could remove the Tzoras Erva of the Eishes Achiv, meaning that category of Eishes Achiv can only now infect the next generation through the mechanism of Tzoras Erva. Well, that mechanism of Tzoras Erva, allowing for the Erva of Eishes Achiv to set up a Ptur of Tzoras Erva, is something that lends itself to removal through a get. Because if Shimon would deliver a get to his wife Rivka, she's no longer a Tzoras Erva, which would mean that if what would that mean? Erva. What does that mean? She's no longer. He gives a. And her status as a Erva is because Shimon is married to her and her Tzara, who's an Erva, but Shimon can remove that and remove the status of Tzoras Erva. I mean, what would be the repercussions of removing this Rivka's status as a Tzoras Erva? She still remains Eishes Achiv. She's no longer married to Shimon. Sorry.
I think she has.
I almost had it.
That's why I think she has to fall into Yibum to Levi.
All right, so you want to fall
And
there.
Levi
So
could
Shimon did not
her.
divorce Rivka.
No.
Okay. Now Shimon does. Levi is Miyabe Rivka. Okay, and he has another one. Okay, so how does it work?
And then he's going to divorce Rivka, which removes.
Levi's going to divorce Rivka.
So she's no longer the co-wife of Shpritza.
Right.
So you remove that through the and Yibun would remove
The Erev of Eishes. But
because of the extra race.
Right. Before I'm trying to figure it out before the extra race. Right. She's saying that if
so you have two events that remove the two.
If Levi delivers a get with Chayov to Rivka, so what do the words mean? And just to translate these words, Yochol hu lahatira mi iser eishes ach l'shiyos. Who is lahatira? Let's say it's a mapik hey. Who is the she over here? Is it Rivka? That doesn't make any sense because Rivka can't get married to Reuven. Even if Levi would divorce Rivka, I mean, Rivka was not only married, right? Was not only married to Reuven's brother once. She was married to Reuven's brother twice. She was married to both Shimon and Levi. She's a double Eishes Ach. So what does he mean when he says Yochel hu latira mi iser Eishes Ach l'cheyos? Again, if you want to argue that she's no longer Tzaras Erva vis-a-vis Shpritzel, that I can understand, and that seems to be indicated by the last words in this Netziv, when he says Shuvlo Tiet Tzarasa, referring to Shpritzel in this case, Tzaras Erva, because Shimon divorced, Levi divorced Rivka, and therefore Shpritzel is not a Tzara with Tzaras Erva. That I can understand, but he's saying that the Iser Eishes Ach could be removed. Isn't that the words? Yachal hatira me Iser Eishes Ach. Why is that so? I don't get it.
Shpritzel through Yibum.
Oh, latira is referring to Shpritzel.
I would think so.
All right, so let's try that. Okay, I'm trying all the different possibilities. Okay, so maybe La Tira is referring to Spritzel. And why? Because of the mitzvah of Yibum. Let's just think about that. Right? Because since Rivka received the divorce from Levi, so she's out of the picture. Now we're left with Spritzel. And Spritzel is no longer Torah with source. So when the Nitzim says Al Yideshi Garish Es HaErev HaMachayev, what he means is that he's going, that by doing that get, by giving that get, he's going to be Mata the Iser Eshes Ach vis-a-vis Spritz. Because Yibam will fall. Does that fit into the language of the Nitzim? Yochel Hula Tir, meaning Levi, we Mata her Eshes. So therefore, she is not a Tzorah, Tzorah's Erev. Tzorah's Erev is out of the picture. And what does that mean? La Tira means. See, when he says Al Yadeshi Garish Erva, he really means the Tzara'as Erva. It's funny that he writes the Erva. That's also a little bit strange. Yochel Human Ra, the Iser Ashes Al Yadeshi Garish Erva. Right, maybe we can stretch a little. Esa Erva Vesat Tzara'as Erva, Bechayav. And Yochel Hu Atir is referring to Levi. Therefore, Spritzel is no longer the Tzara of the Tzaras Erva, because the Tzaras Erva Rivka is out of the picture. And in effect, what Levi did by divorcing his wife Rivka is he set up a mechanism by which the Misa, when he dies, will be Matir Spritzel. Why? Because Spritzel is no longer the Tzara of Rivka, because Levi delivered a get to Rivka B'chai. I think that's good. It's just, I was caught up with the fact that I thought the language indicated that Shimon was delivering a get to his wife Rivka, and therefore when Shimon dies, when Shimon dies, and Shimon has another wife, she is no longer a tzaras. She's no longer a tzaras Erva. Rivka was a tzaras Erva. That's up until the point that Shimon delivers a get. When he delivers a get, then she. See, but that you can't say. Why? Because we know from the. No, that's also. Because when Levi marries Rivka, and Levi's other wife becomes a tzaras Erva. As Shimon delivered a get to his wife Rivka, who's a tzaras Erva b'chayav, then Levi's other wife would not be a tzara to a tzaras Erva because Rivka is out of the picture. What's the difference between that and why is that my shot failed and yours succeeded? Why did I reject my shot that Shimon could have divorced his wife Rivka, who's a tzaras Erva, b'chayav? would have set up a possibility for Rivka's other wife, who's a Tzara of a Tzara's Erva, to now be mutter. So that I said that he's not being matter Isser Ashes Ah. Now you're saying that if it's Levi who's delivering a divorce to Rivka, Levi's other wife is no longer a Tzara's Erva. And in effect, what Levi did was by setting up Yibam, he removes the Isser of Ashes Ah. I don't really see the difference. It seems to me that those are identical. Can you tell me the difference between the two?
I mean, if
What's the difference between saying that Shimon could have divorced Rivka or to say that Levi could have divorced? I mean, isn't it the same identical mechanism? That
you don't get a.
in other words, what I'm saying is if that Shimon would have divorced Rivka, then Shimon's other wife would not be in the parsha of Yibum because of the new Chiddush. Ah. Now, Rivka's Tzara was divorced. What's the status of Shimon's other wife? She's a Tzara. Well, what's the halacha in such a case? First, maybe we should just think this out. We're saying that if Shimon would have divorced his wife, who's a Tzara's Erva, then the Tzara's is no longer a Tzara's. Is that true? Meaning, that's just the idea I need to know. Would she fall for you?
Or isn't she a Tzara's Erva?
Well, no, she's only a Tzara to the Tzara's Erva. The Tzara's Erva was divorced. So what status did she have vis-a-vis Yibum?
Tzara's Erva was because of Leah.
Right. Third wife. Right. So Leah was a Tzara's Erva. I'm sorry. Leah was an Erva. Rivka, in her marriage to Shimon, becomes a Tzara's Erva. And now, if Shimon dies, then Rivka cannot fall for Yibum because she is. If Shimon died, now what's the status of Rivka? Rivka doesn't fall for Yibum because she is a Tzara's Erva. Right, because Leah fell for Yibum as well. Now, what would be if Shimon? Would things change if Shimon gave a divorce to Leah before he died? Well, what's the status of Rivka if at the time of the Misa of Shimon, Leah is no longer in the picture? Do we know the answer to that question? I mean, that's just a basic question. We shouldn't, that would be ignorance on our part if we didn't answer that question. What would be the status of Rivka let me assume, I hope I'm not saying something that's totally wrong, that Rivka in such a case would not be a tzara. Why? Because Leah's out of the picture. Are you willing to?
Well,
do I know that that's wrong? Or
we had the part before. Is it the time when they're married or the time when dies?
That machlokes. I mean, it told Shas Nesuin.
Yeah.
What was the language there? Was it Isa Mapeles or Nesuin Mapilin? Right. So let's just, for argument's sake, if we go according to Maniomer, who says Misa Mapeles, so she's no longer a Tzoras Erva. So the discussion about Tzoras Erva means that at the time of Shimon's death, Leah was married to Shimon, and so is Rivka married to Shimon. Rivka is now a Tzoras Erva. Now, Leah and Rivka fall to Yibum, and Leah is Achos Ishto of Reuven. Therefore, Rivka is also excluded from Yibum vis-a-vis Reuven. However, Levi could be Miyabe and Rivka, or for that matter, Leah. Correct? Either of the two. Okay, that's fine. What, did I miss anything?
No.
Oh, you mean marry both at the same time? I don't think so. I think Yibum is just, you marry one of the two wives, not both. Okay. But theoretically, Levi could have chosen one of the two. Right. So now, the question is, if Levi marries Rivka, and she has the status of a tsaras erva, now Levi marries another woman as well, and he dies. That other woman should be a tsara of a tsaras erva. Now we're saying that it's the Reb Kiva is saying that lechora, why not consider Rivka as Eishes Ah? So the Nitziv answers because he could have divorced her in his lifetime. He's trying to figure out who is he referring to. Let's say if we go with your approach, Steve, it means that Levi could have given a divorce to Rivka in his lifetime. But it just seems to me that in such a case, holding Misa Mapeles, then Levi's other wife is not a tzara of a tzaras erb because Rivka is out of the picture. I don't have to introduce this whole shtick of Torah about Eshes Ish and can he be matter with a get. Those Rabbi Kiva is arguing that there's an error of Eshes Ach in a case where Levi did not divorce Rivka. So if Levi didn't divorce Rivka, Rivka is a tzaras erva. She's out of the picture of Yibum. She therefore becomes Eshes Ach, and Levi's other wife is now a tzaras erva. So what good does the Nitziv gain by saying that Levi could have divorced Rivka? If he would have divorced Rivka, then Spritzel, like Levi's other wife, is no longer a tzara to a tzaras erva. I mean, I don't need the Nitziv for that. That doesn't add that. You know what I mean? Hey, sorry, Rebels, I let you down. No, at about midnight last night, I thought I had it, but it plays games on me. I mean, I had a whole ship prepared for today based on Ship Chkov and Rebbe Chanan Wasserman and Rav Shach. I mean, honestly, if you have these pages, you'll see the Chazon Ish's number Hey on the left side. Do you see such a thing on page Gimel? We'll make another photocopy because. So honestly, what I couldn't figure out is how the Chazon Ish is different than the Kovetz Ha'aretz in Number Dalet. So if you have any time tonight, look that over. So look, I'm going to leave it like this, Rabos. I tried my best, put my best foot forward. Still don't have it. Maybe I'll get lucky, and between now and tomorrow, I'll find the Meromi Sada, because it could be that if I had the original, it might help me. Now, I don't know. Learning Yevamos is a very exciting challenge for me, and I don't want to lose you guys. You're going to tell me, oh, if our Brussels can come in day after day and you can't figure out it, that's it. I'm out of here. So if you could bear with me, again, I'm not going to come back to the Nitziv unless I figure it out. But I'm going to have to figure it out not at 12 midnight. I'm going to have to say it over to myself 10 times and convince myself that I have. Otherwise, we'll have to make a decision. Do we want to go on with this project of answering Rabbi Kiva, or do we want to just leave it for the time being? There's a Tosfos about Islanders, which is very fascinating. There's a Tosfos about Bito. Now, the Tosfos about Bito, he covers here on page Dalet. But I gave you that already, right? Yeah. We'll just make one extra copy. You have done. So look, I don't know what's going to happen between now and tomorrow. Either we'll come back to Netziv if I'm convinced that I have it, and I won't trade you a cup with, my musings of a madman. If that doesn't happen, then we're at a crossroads. We can either go on with Rabbi Vega or put it on the back burners and say, time is of the essence, and we have to make some progress here. So maybe we shouldn't spend a whole month on Rabbi Vega, despite my childhood memories. And we'll go on to either Tosfos Islandis, which you'll see on Daf Beis and Beis on the top, or we'll go back to Tosfos Bito, a summary and analysis of which you'll find on your page down that I gave you. Okay, then. So I'll let you go free from jail and wish you a great day. And I do the best I can. There's some ambiguity, I think, in the text. I mean, I consider myself half intelligent. I'm not totally intelligent, but at least half intelligent. And I'm racking my brains. He doesn't. Starts with a beautiful framework here in which Eishes Ish is different than all the other arayos because Nitan La'ater Yisura began. And then he puts Eishes Ak in that category as a subcategory of an Isur Shetoli B'Baal V'Yafal Atir began. But I don't understand how that can possibly be. You can't be Mater and Isur Eishes Ak with a get. You can only be Mater and Eishes Ak with Yid. And then to top off my ambiguity here, my confusion here, I find that he then introduces Gerushin as a way of removing the status of a Tzoras Erev. Then that has nothing to do with his whole shtickle talk, the whole beautiful framework about the nature of this Erev of Eichesat. If we're holding at Misa Mapelis, then Misa Mapelis means that he didn't divorce her. So if he didn't divorce her, she's a Tzara of a Tzoras Erev. So why does he say in his language, "Reshuvo tia tzarasa tzaras erev"? That's not true, because he didn't divorce. Ella, what? He's going back to the theoretical possibility that he could have divorced. Then it becomes very complicated. Very complicated. Okay then? Ad Khan. Now, Steve, would you mind photocopying first another copy of page Dalit?
We all have it now.
Oh, you'll have Dalit. Okay. Secondly, if you can photocopy for our introduction to Kodshim, the first page of Menachos. I'll give you that in a second. Let me just shut this thing down.